Now, it's a sad fact of the video game industry today that games tend to come out in a, well, to use the most generous term possible, utterly broken, insultingly unplayable state that makes you want to tear your own brain out with a plastic spork. Don't ask me what the least generous term is, some things are best left unsaid. But you know what, sometimes these games do get the love they deserve from a dev team that wants to deliver a quality product, and after patches and so many updates, they end up being something so utterly amazing that they are undeniable. And that is what we're here to talk about today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 broken games that are god tier now. Number 10, Street Fighter V. Now, it's hard to imagine a bigger bag fumble than Street Fighter V when it first released, mainly due to it being a follow-up to Street Fighter IV, which many fans consider to be the saviour of an entire fighting game genre. So anything less than saviour of the entire genre was bound to be a bit of a disappointment. But even with that olive branch being extended, that doesn't change the fact that Street Fighter V was just flat out not finished upon its release. On the single-player front, Street Fighter V shipped with no campaign, no arcade mode, and a survival mode that one would call bare bones if they felt inclined to be insulting to bones. And then there was the multiplayer, which was the most egregious insult to fans. The standard number of players hosting for multiplayer lobbies in a fighting game is around 8, but Street Fighter V could only host 2, and that's if the lobbies worked at all. This was a bit beyond what a simple day one patch could fix, and sure enough, Street Fighter V took 3 entire years before it entered a state that fans consider to be decent. Nowadays, Street Fighter V has an entire fan base who, shock of shocks, are absolutely willing to pay money for it now that it's in an actual finished state. Number 9, Halo Master Chief Collection. So Halo has been around as long as the Xbox, so it was inevitable that Microsoft and 343 Studios would try to make sure that the current gen players could access all of the previous games without having to spend hundreds of dollars on multiple previous gen systems. Unfortunately, Halo the Master Chief Collection really could have used a little more time in the oven. Upon release, the game was panned across the board by both fans and critics for being virtually unplayable. The game came out of the gate riddled with technical issues, both on the single player and multiplayer front. Trying to improve the frame rates for the original trilogy from 30 to 60 FPS ironically made the frame rate worse if you were playing co-op but weren't the host, because you'd get a full second of input lag, and that's on top of all of the usual stuff like constant crashes. But the multiplayer, the thing that Halo fans buy a Halo game for, was the part that got hit the hardest. Matchmaking was an absolute nightmare, with teams being obscenely uneven, and that was assuming matchmaking even connected you to a game at all. It wasn't until the PC port that things began to improve, and after that and a heavy bunch of patching, the Master Chief Collection has finally seen the success that it should have had from the very beginning. Number 8, Fallout New Vegas. Now, Obsidian's reputation is a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they're known for being one of the best Western RPG developers in gaming history, making RPGs that stand the test of time. But on the other hand, their games can often come out a little undercooked. And one of the funniest offenders of this, ironically, is their magnum opus, Fallout New Vegas. Now, Fallout New Vegas was definitely not unplayable upon its release, but it was damn close to it in some ways. Even looking past the occasional glitches like the infamous rotating head, the launch version of New Vegas also suffered from obscenely long load times, low FPS, and constant crashing, the CTD problem still being an issue for many players to this very day. Fortunately, after a ton of patching, the biggest holes in Obsidian's proudest ship were plugged, and New Vegas has since gone on to be widely accepted as the best Fallout game in the entire franchise. While it may have had an incredibly rough first year, barely anybody remembers that anymore, allowing New Vegas to thrive as it deserves. Number 7, Sea of Thieves. Now, when you're making a purely online game, the first thing, the primary thing one could actually say, that you have to get right is making sure the connection remains stable across the board, especially for an online game like Sea of Thieves, which requires you and your friends to be working in tandem to keep your ship running. Unfortunately, this was the biggest issue that many players had with Rareware's pirate title upon release. But even beyond that, the game was just flat out empty for the first few months of life. The primary goal of becoming a pirate legend required months of boring grinding through repetitive battles, meaning that Sea of Thieves was just not interesting enough to commit to it for the first stretch of its life. Fortunately, the game has more than turned things around in that time since. Now, not only are the connection issues basically fixed across the board, but the updates have stuffed this game to bursting with things to do with your pals as you traverse across the 7 seas. It also helps that the core gameplay loop of Sea of Thieves was always solid and fun, unlike the more recent Skull of Bones, which is missing many features that Sea of Thieves had at launch. With better online connection and loads more stuff to do, Sea of Thieves is one of the most fun online games out there right now. Number 6. Battlefield 2042. Okay, so 2021 was not a good year for Battlefield, and this game is unfortunately why. Upon release, 2042 almost immediately took the crown as the worst Battlefield game in the entire franchise, and for a series that stretches back to 2002, that is an accomplishment. Now, Battlefield 2042 drew ire almost immediately for that most unforgivable of sins of SPF games, and that is awful online. Not only were the maps way too big and the combat not as interesting as it could have been, but those two critiques require you to even be able to get into a match at all, which most players couldn't. It was also missing multiple industry standard features at launch, such as a f***ing scoreboard. And then there were the glitches. Oh god, the glitches, many of which screwed up the player XP progression. And if you wanted to give the single player campaign a try instead, well, too bad, because there wasn't one. In the 2 years since though, well, Battlefield 2042 has more than turned it around. Not only is its online play stable, it's a marked improvement over previous entries in quite a lot of ways. A single player campaign has actually been added, and online matches are made infinitely more fun with a variety of quality of life improvements. Battlefield 2042 has gone from one of the worst entries in the entire series to one of its best by a considerable distance. Number 5. Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. Pokémon games, though as financially successful as they've ever been, have definitely seen a decline in quality over the last decade, mainly due to Game Freak's stubborn refusal to use that money to expand their development staff. And then Scarlet and Violet came along. While not materially worse than Sword and Shield, it wasn't a marked improvement either, and on a technical front, it was even worse. Upon release, the game was plagued by graphical and performance issues from top to bottom. Some of them were just annoying, like the inconsistent draw distance, while others were actual game-breaking bugs. Fortunately, in the 2 years since its release, Game Freak has implemented multiple patches to fix the worst of the issues. As for the lack of content, the game has seen multiple expansions with new areas, battles, storylines, and of course Pokémon. Plus, Scarlet and Violet have just released their last DLC expansion earlier this year, bookending a rocky beginning with a rock-solid finale. Number 4. Star Wars Battlefront 2. One of the most reviled game releases of all time, Star Wars Battlefront 2 was ironically mostly solid from a gameplay standpoint. It was basically all down to the microtransactions where this game fell over, shit itself, and then died in a puddle. Every online game has some form of microtransactions, that's for sure, but Battlefront 2 went over the line by locking incredibly powerful characters and weapons behind its loot boxes. This one tiny detail more or less broke the entire game over its knee, as it allowed players to essentially buy their way to victory. This not only turned the entire fan base on the game, but even got EA in trouble with the law on accusations of gambling. As you can imagine, backtracking was inevitable. The loot box system was completely reworked and hero characters were unlocked for everyone. The tide turned in Battlefront 2's favor practically overnight because, shock of shocks, remove the thing that's keeping this game from being fun and it becomes fun. Oh, who could have guessed? Number 3. No Man's Sky. Yeah, you know this story by now. It was bad to begin with, he promised too much, and then it did a load of updates. Look at it, it's the best game you've ever played. Trust me, like, the VR mode alone is worth downloading this game. I've got a script in front of me, right, that just goes through all of the tumultuous ups and downs of this game, but you know the story by now. Just look at what it was. This is the footage of what it was, and this is the footage of what it is now. Ooh, yeah. Number 2, Cyberpunk 2077. Oh god, I could just do the exact same thing, but I've just done for No Man's Sky for this. And you know what? I will. CD Projekt Red delivered an absolute stinker early on, right? But look at it right now. Look at the amount of effort that's been put into updating it, to expanding this already vibrant world, but making it so... just you want to live in this place. I mean, it's pretty scummy and you probably die just walking down the street or going to get your groceries, but still, I want to be in this world because it looks so beautifully crafted. Plus, the latest DLC, Phantom Liberty, is just, chef's kiss, my friend. And number 1, Final Fantasy XIV. So all of the previous entries pale in comparison to the utter disaster that was Final Fantasy XIV when it first launched. A bomb so complete and overwhelming that the president of Square Enix admitted to it having done great damage to the brand. The worst major MMORPG on the market by some considerable distance, Final Fantasy XIV definitely needed some work. So how did we get to today, where not only is Final Fantasy XIV still going, but running rings around whatever MMOs are still standing over a decade later? Well, simply put, they burned the whole goddamn godforsaken thing to the ground and started again. Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 just had too many fires to put out, so the best plan was to just start from scratch, and so 1.0 died in a glorious cutscene fire, and what came after was 2.0, better known as A Realm Reborn. A Realm Reborn relaunched the entire thing with a brand new UI, a brand new storyline, and completely overhauled combat. From there, Final Fantasy XIV has only built on itself until it has just become the epic, fast-paced action MMORPG that it is today. Final Fantasy XIV Online is now the most profitable game in the franchise, and if we're being honest, probably the only thing that's really keeping the lights on over at Square Enix these days. I'm sorry, but yeah, they've delivered some stinkers. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 broken games that are god tier now. I hope that you enjoyed that, and let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Instagram at RetroJ, but the O is a 0, or you can swing by FGS, or the Future Game Show, where I'm doing all my daily gaming content going forward. Hope to see you over there. Take care of yourself, you big ledge. Remember, you deserve all the best things in life, like love, happiness, and success, and do not let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise. Now go out there and smash it. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.